What is going on, guys? We're back with more picks and predictions this weekend. The UFC goes to Louisiana for UFC 318. It's headlined by Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier in their third fight against each other. Obviously, we all know this is Dustin Poirier's retirement matchup. So, a lot of people hating on this card, but I think it's actually fairly stacked. I do like this for a pay-per-view. Obviously, the BMF belt on the line for the main event, so no undisputed title on the line, which is probably why people don't seem to like this card as much. But I think Poirier, he deserves the headline in his retirement fight. We all really want to see him go out in a good way, and I think that, in that main event matchup, we don't want to see either Max Holloway or Poirier ever lose, so it's going to be pretty emotionally charged. But without further ado, let me jump right into the picks and predictions for every single fight on the UFC 318 card. Kicking off the card, we have Carli Judice versus Nicolle Caliari. It's a low-level women's MMA matchup, and we love breaking these down on this channel. So let's start off with Carli Judice. She's 4-2, very early in her MMA career, coming off that knockout win over Eunice Dubin. And Dubin, if you remember, was the plus 700 underdog that got a knockout on the Contender Series to get into the UFC. So Carli Judice goes out there, does what she's supposed to do against Dubin, gets her out of there early. Prior to that, she was on a 2-fight skid of split decision losses to Gabriela Fernandez and Ernesta Karishkate. And then Nicolle Caliari, on the other hand, 8-3, so still also fairly early in her MMA career, coming off a split decision loss to Ernesta Karishkate herself. And to be completely honest, in this matchup, it's just going to be primarily striker versus grappler. Carli Judice should be able to light up Caliari on the feet. And then, if Caliari gets this fight to the ground, then you're going to see Judice in some sort of trouble. And Caliari, once she gets the fight to the ground, she's extremely, extremely aggressive with submissions, looking for dangerous positions. And while obviously that is something you do want to see from a fighter, it does get her in scenarios where, fighters can get back up on her, get back up on the feet when she gets them to the ground. So that's something to keep note of. And I'm actually just going to slightly lean Nicolle Caliari here. I like the grappling advantage. I think that, she's going to be aggressive for that takedown. She's going to know that she needs that takedown. And Carli Judice, I think, can be taken down. The thing with Judice, though, she's going to be 5'7" with a 68-inch reach advantage here. Or sorry, not a reach advantage, but a 68-inch reach. A 6-inch reach advantage over her opponent, Nicolle Caliari. So she's going to be the better striker. She's going to be the rangier striker. And if she can keep this fight on the feet, she's going to win. I just think that, Caliari knowing exactly what her game plan needs to be in this matchup, and with Judice being someone that I think can be taken down from time to time, I think that Caliari can make this, a fairly close decision. So I definitely see this fight going, to the scorecards. I think the over is actually fairly affordable on this matchup, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's a minus 245 for the over 2.5. I definitely think that, with the way Caliari is going to approach this fight, going for a bunch of takedowns, I definitely think that that over is a little bit undervalued. So maybe you do find some value in the over 2.5 for this matchup, but I'm going to lean Caliari. I'm not going to play this fight at all. Maybe I'll play the over if I think that, it's something that's good to parlay with something else, but so far I haven't played this fight. If I was going to bet, it would be the over though. But nonetheless, I'm going to slightly lean Caliari. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next up, we got Bruno Ferreira versus Jackson McVey, and Jackson McVey has had a little bit of an interesting time over the last couple weeks. He was supposed to make his UFC debut back at UFC 317, and, he had a fight against Cedric Dumas, which got canceled because, Dumas had a literal ankle monitor that he couldn't get off in time for the fight. Then he gets rescheduled for the same card against Christopher Ewart, and Ewart is unable to make weight, misses weight by, I think, like over 10 pounds. So then that fight also gets canceled. So now Jackson McVey, made that weight cut before, now making that weight cut again for UFC 318 a couple weeks later. So it's going to be interesting. He's had an interesting time getting to his UFC debut, and to be honest, even this fight, he did take on short notice because Bruno Ferreira was initially supposed to face Ikram Aliskerov in this matchup, but Ikram Aliskerov pulled out, and now he's fighting Jackson McVey, who kind of stepped in on short notice. So interesting couple weeks for Jackson McVey. He's saying yes to, the challenge, but Bruno Ferreira, very, very tricky outing for your, UFC debut. Definitely a very tough opponent to be your first fight within the UFC. He's coming off that submission win in the second round to Armen Petrosian. Prior to that, he did lose to Abus Magomedov, but, he did make that a fight. And Abus Magomedov, while he did get fraud checked a couple times in the UFC, he did lose to, like, Sean Strickland and Kyle Barallo. So those guys are, top of the division type fighters. And then after that, he's been looking pretty decent. So, Bruno Ferreira does have some good wins under his belt. Another loss on his record is to Nursultan Ruziboyev, but Ruziboyev also, looking pretty good. And Ferreira's, getting some good wins under his belt. Jerry Rodriguez win, Phil Hawes, Dustin Stoltzfus, who I think is like fairly underrated. He knocks him out in the first round, and then Armen Petrosyan obviously gets that armbar off him. So I think that Ferreira is going to have all the experience advantage, obviously. Jackson McVey, just 6-0, early in his UFC career, 26 years old. He's still a little bit of a child, still a little bit green as a prospect, and I think that Bruno Ferreira will have the right tools to get this one done. I think he does knock him out early. That's just kind of the way Ferreira tends to fight. I think he does get this one done. I think the line is extremely wide, though. Minus 600 on this matchup. I don't really think I'll be playing it, but I'm going to be picking Ferreira. I think he gets it done by knockout. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Ryan Spann versus Lukasz Brzeski, and I'm going to go with Ryan Spann here. He's got the lighter man skill, fought most of his career at light heavyweight, then moved up to heavyweight, and he didn't have the best debut, but against Waldo Cortez Acosta, man, I think Cortez Acosta is fairly good. He's coming off that win to Sergey Spivak, so now he's entering, the conversation of fighting some of the higher ranked heavyweights in the division. So Waldo Cortez Acosta, definitely a good fighter, not really a bad one to take a loss to. And, outside of that, Ryan Spann, against Lukasz Brzeski here, Brzeski is fairly well-rounded. He's going to throw decent volume on the feet. If you take him to the ground, he's not completely lost. He has, that decision win over Walter Walker, which I think it was interesting. I think the fight was close. I think Walker could have potentially won that fight. And obviously, Walker's been looking great as of late, so that is a good win. But mind you, if you go back and watch that matchup, I think that, Walter Walker was in terrible condition when he first came into the UFC, and that is who he fought. That's when he fought Lukasz Brzeski. And post that, Walter Walker just got shredded, and now he's kind of, just destroying people with heel hooks every other day. So Walter Walker, prior to this, was pretty fat. So in that fight against Lukasz Brzeski, it wasn't the best version of him, but he does have a win over him. Outside of that, I just think that, Brzeski pretty mid everywhere. And Ryan Spann, I just think is going to be lighter on his feet. I think he's going to be quicker with the strikes. He's got, good size for the heavyweight division. And I just think that if he comes in here focused, it won't look like the Waldo Cortez Acosta fight. I see Ryan Spann, landing something big. I think he gets Brzeski out of there. I think he can knock him out, maybe in the second or third round. But Ryan Spann should be able to get this one done as long as he stays light on his feet. I think he has a better striking. I think, he has a speed advantage. I see him getting it done. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Jimmy Crute versus Marcin Prachnio, and I'm going to go with Jimmy Crute, but very, hesitant. Definitely not betting on this fight. I think that, Prachnio could definitely knock out a Jimmy Crute. He hits hard. He's chaotic. He's definitely the better striker of the two in this matchup. And, Jimmy Crute, tough. No wins in his last 5 fights, 2 draws, and then, a couple losses in there. He's just kind of struggling to put it together and actually get his hand raised out there in the octagon. So, I don't know, man. I think with Jimmy Crute, really hard guy to trust. I do think that he can take Prachnio down here, and I think that that's going to be his game plan. I think on the feet, he could get put out. He could get put out cold. If he does get knocked out, I wouldn't be extremely surprised. But I think he does have the skills to, take him down. I think that his UFC career should kind of be on the line since he hasn't won a fight in a couple years now. His last win was in 2020 against Modestas Bukauskas. After that, he loses to Anthony Smith, loses to Jamal Hill, has 2 fights with Alonzo Menefield where he draws the first one, loses the second one, and then, draws with Rodolfo Bellato. So I'm going to go with, Jimmy Crute to get this one done by getting the takedowns, but really hesitant, not really a fighter you can trust. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next up, we got Adam Fugitt versus Islam Dulatov. And Dulatov, pretty hyped up prospect, making his UFC debut. He's 11-1, 26 years old. You can tell by his name that people are going to expect this guy to be really good. And, he is fairly good, actually. And Adam Fugitt, I think, is in trouble this weekend. I think that, Fugitt is tough. He does have okay striking. I think that, he's primarily better if he does take the fight to the ground. But I would say he is well-rounded. He is also, like I said, super tough on the feet. So he can definitely eat a lot of damage. And I think that Dulatov is going to give it to him. I think he's going to give a lot of damage onto Adam Fugitt in this matchup. And I think that, if this fight does kind of go into the clinch, I don't think that, Fugitt's going to have a good time trying to take Dulatov down. I think Dulatov's takedown defense can definitely hang for sure in this matchup. And I also think that technically if Dulatov really wants to take this fight to the ground on his own terms, he can. I just don't see him even needing to do that. I think that on the feet, he throws insane volume. He's going to piece up Adam in this matchup, and I think that over, the first couple rounds, we're going to see him really put the pace on Adam, and I think that he's going to get Adam out of there. So while Adam is tough, I do think that, over a bunch of sustained damage throughout this fight, he will get put out. And let's move on to the next matchup. Next up, we got Ateba Gautier versus Robert Valentin. And Robert Valentin coming off that really, really sad fight to Torres Finney, which he lost by split decision. And, Torres Finney, man, put on one of the worst performances against Valentin there. So he's going to be pretty frustrated going to this matchup. But, I don't think Gautier is going to be trying to take him down whatsoever. So he's going to get a fighter now that's not going to shoot a single takedown on him. Gautier, 23 years old, but just an absolute athletic specimen. 6'4", 81 inches of reach, and, super quick. His striking is, lightning fast and really good. And he also throws with some real insane power. And he's coming off that knockout win to Jose Medina. And the thing that's impressive is that Medina is pretty trash as a fighter. He's not the best. But putting someone like Jose Medina out is something that is impressive. He's got one of those South American chins that just don't go down. And we saw that in the Zach Reese fight. Zach Reese was not able to put Jose Medina was not able to get Jose Medina out of there. And Ateba Gautier does it in the first round. So he's going to hit really hard. A bunch of damage is coming toward Robert Valentin's way. And Robert Valentin, we've seen him get knocked out before. We know his chin can be checked. And I just think that Gautier is going to come out there and knock him out. So pretty wide line on this one once again. The only thing on the Gautier side is that he is obviously just a little bit on the younger side, only 23 years old, so he's got a lot to learn. But at 7-1, just a couple fights less than his opponent, Robert Valentin, who's 10-5. So, not that much of a disadvantage on the experience side, but he is just a little bit younger, so maybe he's more prone to making some mistakes. But I think that he's quick, he's definitely powerful, and I think he puts Robert Valentin out this weekend. Next up, we got Francisco Prado versus Nikolay Veretennikov. And, I really like Francisco Prado. I think he is a pretty good fighter. He's 23 years old, Argentinian fighter, and he's coming off a couple losses here. Recently decided to move up to welterweight from lightweight. His last fight at lightweight was a loss to Daniel Zellhuber. Then after that, he goes up to welterweight and, loses to Jake Matthews, where it seemed like the size, going up in weight class was a little bit of a struggle for him. Now he's fighting, 35-year-old Nikolay Veretennikov, and he's the favorite in this matchup, but I think I'm going to pick Veretennikov to get it done here. Veretennikov, on the feet, he is really good. I think that he can definitely keep up with a lot of different fighters on the feet. He had that split decision loss to Danny Barlow in his UFC debut, and Danny Barlow is, still a very decent striker. I know he's coming off that loss to Sam Patterson where he got knocked down. I actually did pick Sam Patterson to beat him in that fight, but I didn't think that he would get knocked out. But now, looking at Nikolay Veretennikov, he lost to Danny Barlow. Then he lost to Austin Vanderford in his next matchup. And Vanderford, did really just expose his takedown defense quite a bit. But the thing with Francisco Prado is while he can kind of mix it up, we saw the size advantage from Jake Matthews pose problems for Francisco Prado in his last fight. I'm not sure if welterweight is the right spot for Prado. And I think that, Veretennikov could potentially defend these takedowns from Prado. So if Prado doesn't mix it up, I think on the feet, Veretennikov with, this standing up at 6'1", 74 inches of reach, I think that he can kind of put the striking on Francisco Prado here. And if Prado does get some takedowns, though, I think he will do well. I just think he's a little bit young at 23 years old. He's going to have to stick to a very, very solid game plan here if he's to beat Veretennikov. And Prado's kind of a brawler, man, and obviously that's kind of why we like him as a fighter, because he does go out there and brawl. But I think that if he goes out there and brawls with Veretennikov, I think that Veretennikov might just get the best of him. So I'm going to lean Nikolay Veretennikov here. I think that obviously if the takedowns do come from the Prado side, I think it's going to be, a little bit of trouble for Veretennikov, but we'll see what happens. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Marvin Vettori versus Brendan Allen, and I'm asking the same question as everyone else as to why this is so low on the fight card. Both of these guys have headline fight night events themselves before, and, now they're just coming in here on the freaking undercard of this fight, and that's interesting with, some fights like Kevin Holland, Daniel Rodriguez above these guys, Michael Johnson, Daniel Zellhuber above these guys. It's really interesting that this fight is this low on the card, but still a really, really good fight. Marvin Vettori, obviously, I think not in the best spot in his career right now. We obviously did see him, challenge Israel Adesanya for the title. After that, he goes out there and beats Paulo Costa. Then he loses to Robert Whittaker, beats Roman Dolidze, loses to Jared Cannonier. This all happens in 2023. And then he takes a 2-year break, comes back in 2025, and then loses to Roman Dolidze, someone that he did beat prior. So Roman Dolidze, man, I think Dolidze is an interesting fighter because I just don't think he's that good, but he does find ways to win sometimes. And now, coming off a loss to Roman Dolidze, I'm not that high on Marvin Vettori myself. I think that, Vettori, good on the ground, has okay striking, clearly, but, still lost a striking fight primarily to Roman Dolidze, which is not really too impressive in my opinion. And then Brendan Allen is a really good grappler. And, the thing is, he's not afraid to grapple with the best of them. Him and Anthony Hernandez had a really good back and forth fight. Brendan Allen picks up a clean round on Anthony Hernandez. He picks up a clean round on Nasruddin Imavov, and Imavov, one fight away, if not, should already be in like the title picture for the middleweight division. So Imavov's definitely up there. Brendan Allen cleanly takes round 1 off of him, then is unable to, get him down for the other rounds. But I just think that here against Marvin Vettori, he's going to like really just engage in the grappling. I think someone like Vettori is probably just going to, allow him to, welcome him into the grappling world. And I think that overall, Brendan Allen will pull this one off. I see him, out grappling Marvin Vettori for the most part here. I think he has some decent work on the feet. I don't think either of these guys are really that much of a threat with the striking. And I would say Vettori is maybe slightly shown better skills when it comes to the stand-up, but nothing crazy. And I think that overall, Brendan Allen, what he's shown to do on the ground, I think he can kind of take it to Marvin Vettori here. I think he's a better fighter. I see him getting it done. The losses on his record to great fighters, and, he did put up a decent fight there. And then Vettori, coming off that loss to Roman Dolidze, it really left a lot still on the table, in my opinion. So I'm going to go with Brendan Allen here. I think the line is pretty affordable too. And let's move on to the next matchup. All right, up next, we have Vinicius Oliveira versus Kyler Phillips. And I love Vinicius Oliveira. He's cashed a bunch of slips for me as of late. I bet on him against, in his fight against Sopai, in his fight against Ricky Simon, in his fight against Said Nurmagomedov. I've been betting on this guy, Vinicius Oliveira, and he's been always, putting in the work and getting it done for me. Ricky Simon, I think, is one of the more impressive wins in this, because with Ricky Simon, you're getting pressure wrestled the entire 3 rounds, and Vinicius Oliveira able to stay upright, do what he needs to do. Similarly against Said Nurmagomedov, Said Nurmagomedov, not your average Nurmagomedov that will just wrestle the entire time, but still has decent amount of wrestling, still a very well-rounded fighter. Vinicius Oliveira goes out there and makes it look good against both Simon and Nurmagomedov, which gives me confidence that he should be able to take out Kyler Phillips here. Kyler Phillips, he did style on Pedro Munoz, so that is one good matchup that he did have. But let's be real, Pedro Munoz, man, a lot of people beat Pedro Munoz. Kyler Phillips happens to be one of them. Then after that, he goes out there and fights Rob Font, and he does get Rob Font down in the first round, is able to kind of hold him down, but then absolutely just gasses out. And against a Vinicius Oliveira, man, unless, he's going to make sure that he tests that cardio of yours. He's going to push you to the limit. He's going to run a high pace on you the entire 3 rounds. So you're going to have to be willing to go. And you're not going to be able to get Vinicius Oliveira down very simply. So I think that, if Kyler Phillips can't get takedowns of Vinicius Oliveira, which I don't think, if Ricky Simon couldn't, I don't see Kyler Phillips kind of holding him down. On top of that, in the striking, Vinicius Oliveira is not the type of fighter to let a fight just slip away on volume. He's going to be there. He's going to push the pace. He's going to really put it on you. Kyler Phillips does not seem to have, like that crazy knockout power to just kind of put Vinicius Oliveira away. So I think that all the signs here point to Vinicius Oliveira. I think his line is extremely, extremely affordable. I'm a little bit actually concerned as to why his line is what it is. I think it should be a little bit wider. Obviously, based on how I'm talking, that at this point, yes, I have played Vinicius Oliveira. I think he is a really good bet for this week. And, maybe it's a little bit of bias for all the slips that he's cashed me in the past couple fights of his, but I think that he should be able to handle a Kyler Phillips. So I'm going to go with Oliveira. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight up, we got the main card opener of Michael Johnson versus Daniel Zellhuber. I actually don't know why this fight is higher up on the card than, the Brendan Allen one and even the Vinicius Oliveira one, but, Michael Johnson, vet of the game, so, got to give him the respect there. 23-19, ton of experience, has fought, a lot of great fighters in his time. And, now he's coming off that win to Otman Azatar by knockout. And, he does look good. Michael Johnson, at 39 years old, still packing enough power to put anyone out in this division. And Daniel Zellhuber, he's never been knocked out. He's got that Mexican chin. He's going to be rangier than most of his opponents. 77 inches of reach for Daniel Zellhuber to Michael Johnson's 73 inches. Zellhuber is also going to be standing at 6 feet 1 inches tall. So Zellhuber going to be the bigger fighter, going to be rangier. He's going to fight behind that jab. This is going to be a pure kickboxing matchup. I don't think either of these guys are shooting a takedown here. And in a pure kickboxing matchup, I think that, on the rounds, on the scorecards, Zellhuber will definitely be in the lead the entire time. I think that when it comes to being able to knock out the other, Michael Johnson probably has a little bit more power, but Michael Johnson also has been knocked out a couple times in his career. We've seen him go down, and the Zellhuber definitely has the power to put somebody out. Maybe not as much power as Michael Johnson, but he himself has never been knocked out. We've seen him wobbled. We've seen him hurt, but he's got good recovery, and, he definitely has that Mexican chin. So I don't think Johnson gets a knockout. I think that Zellhuber could potentially knock out Johnson. I think Zellhuber could also win this one on the scorecard. So all things kind of point to Zellhuber. I think that, no one really going to shoot a takedown here. It's just going to be a kickboxing fight, and I see Zellhuber winning by either knockout or decision. It's up to you, but yeah, Zellhuber is going to be the pick. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Dan Ige versus Patricio Pitbull, and Patricio Pitbull, very lackluster UFC debut against Yair Rodriguez earlier this year, and then Dan Ige is coming off that win to Sean Woodson, where very sketchy stoppage, early stoppage for sure, but if you look at the scorecards, he was up on the scorecards either way going into that round, so he was definitely on the way to win that fight. I mean, some people may disagree with those scorecards, but it was a close enough fight where I don't think it matters, and I mean, at the end of the day, on paper, it says he got it finished. So coming off that win to Sean Woodson. Now, Patricio Pitbull, obviously, you're going to hear a lot about people talking about him. If you don't know him, I guess people are going to call you a casual. Really good Bellator fighter, Bellator royalty, probably the best Bellator fighter to ever exist. And while he has done real good work outside of the UFC, he's kind of old now, coming into the UFC. He's 38 years old at the time of this fight, and I think we've seen kind of the best years of Patricio Pitbull behind him. He's gritty, very well-rounded, can kind of do it all. But so can Dan Ige. I think that Dan Ige is a very similar fighter where he's gritty, can kind of do it all. He can work you on the ground. He can definitely, put a bunch of volume on the feet. And we definitely know that Dan Ige is an absolute savage. We know what he did coming in on very, very short notice, like a 1 hour notice for the Diego Lopez fight. We saw him push Lerone Murphy to a very, very close decision. I had a big bet on Lerone Murphy in that fight at UFC 308, and I was sweating that one because it was 1-1 going to the third round, and Dan Ige was winning majority of the third round. Lerone Murphy kind of just stole it at the end. So Dan Ige pushing Lerone Murphy to the absolute boundaries, and then after that winning against Sean Woodson. I just think that he's going to be younger. He's going to be more active, and I think that he can kind of push the pace on Patricio Pitbull here. Pitbull, obviously great career, but at 38 years old, I just see Dan Ige doing more work and getting this one done. So he's going to be the pick. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next up, we got Kevin Holland versus Daniel Rodriguez. And Kevin Holland, bro, if you've been watching for a while, I'm the biggest Kevin Holland hater. But he's on a 2-fight win streak, and we know that he struggles once he gets taken down. But against Daniel Rodriguez, that's not something he has to worry about at all. I think the Vicente Luque submission win was actually, fairly impressive. I thought Luque was going to be able to take him down at will, but he was able to do really well in that fight. Obviously, he has that 81-inch reach advantage. He's going to be able to light up Daniel Rodriguez on the feet, and I just don't think that he has to worry about much coming back his way on the Daniel Rodriguez side. But Rodriguez himself is very tough. He did get knocked out by Ian Gary, but Ian Gary is an extremely precise striker, and I just think that, Kevin Holland's probably going to win this one up on the scorecards. I think he's going to light up Daniel Rodriguez across 3 rounds. I don't know if there's going to be much grappling going on in this fight, but I think that, Holland should be able to stay up on the feet, do what he wants to do. I don't think he puts Daniel Rodriguez out. I think he does a lot of damage to Rodriguez, but I see this fight going all 3 rounds, and I see Kevin Holland getting it done. Next up, we got the co-main event. We got Paulo Costa versus Roman Kopylov, and I'm going to go with Roman Kopylov to get this one done. He's obviously, racking up a bunch of wins inside the UFC. He has that sole loss to Anthony Hernandez, but we know how good Fluffy is. He's obviously looking for a top 5 opponent in the middleweight division. And now, he's fighting up against Paulo Costa, who doesn't take his UFC career very seriously, has a ton of losses in the last couple fights of his. Lost to Israel Adesanya, then Marvin Vettori, beats Luke Rockhold, but that's a washed up Luke Rockhold, then loses to Whitaker, and then Strickland, where he just didn't really do anything in that fight. Now, Roman Kopylov, he's shown that he's a pretty high IQ fighter. He will mix in takedowns when needed, like he did against Cesar Almeida. He himself has good takedown defense and is a pretty high volume striker. Overall, I don't think there's going to be any wrestling going on in this fight. I think that it's going to be a purely kickboxing match where I think Kopylov is just going to outwork Paulo Costa. I think Costa's going to emote. I see Costa, hitting Roman Kopylov with something big, wobbling him while, losing the entire round, and then just hitting an emote and not caring about the fight. So that's what I really see happening here. I think Roman Kopylov overall will take the fight more seriously, land more volume, and outwork Paulo Costa here on the feet. I think he has the tools to do that. I think he has the striking to do that and the speed to do that. And yeah, outside of that, I mean, if Costa comes in here with a wrestle heavy, smudge him up against the fence game plan, there's a possibility, but let's be real. Costa's never done that, and, we can't really expect Costa to do that. So I like Kopylov. I like the line on him, too. I think it is fairly affordable. Let's move on to the main event. In the main event, we have Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier for Dustin Poirier's retirement fight. And, it really makes me sad to break this one down because I got to pick who I think is going to lose this fight. Obviously, picking who I think is going to win means I'm going to pick who I think is going to lose. And I'm going to pick Max Holloway to win this fight. I think that, in the third outing with Max Holloway getting his last chance at a redemption to beat Dustin Poirier. I think he beats him, and I think Poirier goes out on a loss. I mean, BMF belt on the line. And I think that there's just so many emotions that are charged into this fight for Dustin Poirier that, I just see him going to like a close decision where, he brawls it out with Max Holloway and ends up, losing a slight close decision, gives Max Holloway his respects, and then, obviously leaves the gloves in the octagon and retires. That's how I see this fight playing out for Dustin Poirier. I think that Poirier, if you look back at his other fights against Max Holloway, he really did mix in the wrestling, mixed in the grappling, got some timely takedowns to get that fight done. And I think that overall, Holloway has evolved a little bit more as a fighter than, Dustin Poirier throughout the years. Obviously, both of them have evolved, but I think Holloway has had a bigger evolution. And I also think that with this being Poirier's retirement fight, with the BMF belt being on the line, with it being in Louisiana, he's not going to shoot takedowns in this fight. I think he's going to brawl with Holloway. I think they're both going to land, maybe 1,000 significant strikes. Whatever the over is on significant strikes in this fight, hammer it. Hammer the over on the rounds. No one's going down in this fight. They're going all 5 rounds. They're giving us, an absolute banger. And then I see Holloway winning a very slight edge decision. So that's how I see this fight playing out. I think that, obviously it's very close. I would definitely not bet on this fight. I also wouldn't want to bet to see either of these guys lose. So I'm putting that out there as well. But I'm going to pick Max Holloway to win for those reasons. And yeah, that will be it for all the picks and predictions for UFC 318. Thank you guys for tuning in. Definitely check out our website, betkopicks.com, if you guys do want to access the exact bets that we are placing for every single UFC card. It's $20 a month. It really helps support the channel, helps support our content. Check out our short form content if you haven't. We do some fun stuff on the short form side, so check that out on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. But yeah, overall, check out betkopicks.com if you do want, and good luck to everyone on their bets for UFC 318.